Amy said, even God forgave Mary Magdalene.
Well, good evening. Oh, I'm going to lose my little visitor here. So, we're continuing our Bible class looking at the passages. So if you're joining us, I hope that you would engage with us through the live chatting. I've got the chat up here. The passage tonight we're going to be looking at is Jericho, the city of Rahab. And I'm real excited about it. I think that afterwards we're going to have some really good discussion about it. So even if you want to open up your Bibles and go to Joshua chapter 2, and after we look at this, I love this because we're able to go and look at some of these. Hey, Lacey, good evening. Lacey's joining us. You have to use the mic. You have to use the mic.
Hi, Lacey. This is Becky.
Is it on? Oh, I think that one might be paused. Okay. So I'm excited about this class tonight. So like I said, if you want to open up to Joshua chapter 2, this is the context of the story. And what we're going to look at is the geography. Look at the city itself and some of the facts of supporting. This is one of those kind of controversial areas where they said this is kind of an impossible situation where it didn't really happen. And so I think this is some good evidence tonight. So we're going to go ahead and watch it, about 20 minutes, I believe, and then we'll come back. Hopefully we'll have some good discussion, so get ready. And I hope you'll engage us with some chat, and then we'll have some talking in here.
This is the ancient city of Jericho. Excavations have revealed information and evidence that support habitation here, off and on, making this city the oldest city in the world. Beautiful, fertile grounds and gushing springs have earned this city the distinction as the city of the palm trees. It's here at this site that God chose to destroy one of the most fortified cities known in this land. But also, He chose to demonstrate His power and His mercy through the faith and courage of a young Canaanite woman named Rahab. The ancient city of Jericho lies about 6 miles from the Jordan River and about 7.5 miles northwest of the Dead Sea and about 3,000 feet below Jerusalem, 14 miles away. A large gushing spring and the fertile plain surrounding the city earned it the distinction, the City of Palm Trees. A major east-west road ran next to the city, intersecting with the Jordan at a ford nearby, making Jericho a strategic crossgrounds. The ancient city of Jericho had already been occupied for many centuries before the Israelites arrived in 1400 BC. It had an inner wall and an outer fortified wall several feet thick, enclosing about 9 acres of land. To the Israelites entering the Promised Land, Jericho presented a major obstacle.
I've been to Jericho on several occasions, and I've crawled all over that ancient tell, and I've seen for myself the remains of this huge fortification system with a revetment wall that's still intact and what then was on top this huge massive wall. And from outside down below, it must have been sort of a daunting sight to look up and see those massive walls.
The Israelites weren't going to conquer Jericho without God's help. It was an important city, a walled city, and the Israelites had no military advantages to speak of. They didn't have a trained soldiery. They didn't have any siege machinery. Apart from God's command, they had no business even attempting to conquer the city.
The city of Jericho was surrounded by this massive wall that you see here. This embankment, or this retaining wall that you see, was made of these massive stones that are 10 to 12 feet high. Up above this retaining wall, another wall stood made of mud brick. And that massive wall was 20 to 25 feet tall. At the crest of the embankment was another mud brick wall that stood 50 feet above the ground layer. I can only imagine the pride and the arrogance of the Canaanite people as they looked out in the valley. wondering how the Israelites circling their city could breach their walls.
The book of Joshua tells us that when the citizens of Jericho heard about the Israelites coming into their land, that their hearts did melt and their spirit left them. Now, that's really a way of saying that they were just plain scared, but as the citizens of Jericho took refuge inside the massive walls of this fortified city, I can't help but wonder how many of them began to develop a false sense of security, especially when the children of Israel for several days just simply walked around their city walls and never attacked.
For 7 days, the Israelites marched around the city. On the seventh day, after their seventh circuit around the city, the priests blew their trumpets, the people shouted, and the walls of the city fell. Then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city with the edge of the sword. Excavations have shown that the mud brick wall that stood above the retaining wall some 20 feet fell outwards, forming a ramp up into the city. The Bible describes the event very precisely. In Joshua chapter 6, verse 20, it says that the children of Israel went up into the city, every man straight before him. In addition, archaeologists found several key features, one of which was the remains of burnt brick, as you see here. Joshua tells us that Israel burned the city of Jericho and everything in it. And once again, the discoveries of archaeology have verified the truth of this record. Noted archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, despite being an unbeliever, described the massive destruction she saw in Jericho as follows. The destruction was complete. Walls and floors were blackened or reddened by fire, and every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. In most rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burnt, but the collapse of the walls of the eastern rooms seemed to have taken place before they were affected by the fire.
There have been no less than 4 major excavations at Jericho by individuals like Sullen and Watzinger, John Garstang, Kathleen Kenyon, and others. But they are not all in agreement with regard to the date of city level 4, the proposed city that Joshua conquered. But while there is debate about the dates that are associated with Jericho, what is not in question is what they found at city level 4. There were plentiful amounts of charred grain in large storage jars, a highly fortified city, the destruction of the upper city walls before the city was burned, and most interesting of all, the way that the upper red mud brick wall fell down flat to the base of the revetment wall. Now, these findings are incredibly consistent with the biblical description of the fall of Jericho.
We can assume that there were thousands of people inside the wall when the Israelites came against the city. Joshua tells us that Rahab's house was incorporated into the fortification system, begging the question of how God would save her house when the walls fell.
In the book of Joshua, we are introduced to a woman named Rahab. She lives in Jericho and plays a vital part in the story. She's identified as a prostitute, and her house may have been some kind of way station or a tavern. She's also engaged in drying flax, which is used to make rope. And it's interesting that a rope will figure into the story of Rahab's salvation.
At the north end of the Tell of Jericho, archaeologists made some astounding discoveries that seem to relate to Rahab. The German excavation of 1907 to 1909 found that along the north short stretch of the lower city wall, destruction was limited, leaving remnants of the mud brick wall standing to a height of over 8 feet. What is more, there were houses built against the wall, and it's quite possible that this is where Rahab's house was.
Well, today at Jericho, the houses on that north end of the tell where Sullen and Watzinger had once excavated, they're no longer in existence. And the reason for that is that once those houses were exposed, then rain and simple erosion eradicated those buildings. But there are photographs and records from that dig that do still survive. And what they reveal is that this was, in the northern part, a poorer part of the city. And yet, how is it that those buildings survived to some extent, whereas in the stronger part of the city, they were completely destroyed. Again, there's a lot of debate associated with the findings of Sultan and Watzinger and what date should be given to what they found on the northern end of the tell. But we still have to come away with some very compelling information here and really be fascinated by the fact that what they did find was consistent with what we read about in the Bible.
Since the city wall formed the back wall of the houses, the spies could have readily escaped, and from this location on the north side of the city, it was only a short distance to the hills of the Judean wilderness, where the spies hid for 3 days. Considering Rahab's occupation, real estate values must not have been too high here, since the houses were positioned on the embankment between the upper and lower city walls, likely serving as the poor part of town, perhaps even a slum district.
The fact that the German excavators actually found a city area in a slum part of a neighborhood that hadn't fallen is remarkable. But what is actually even more remarkable is the courage and the faith of this woman who risked everything for what she came to believe, and how then God took her, introduced her into the lineage of Christ by allowing her to be the great-great-grandmother of King David. Then in James chapter 2 in the New Testament, God used her as an exemplar of faith alongside this great patriarch named Abraham.
Rahab, the great-great-grandmother of David, was a truly amazing woman, not just because of what she did, but who she was inside. In Hebrews chapter 11, she is one of only 2 women mentioned of those who exemplified godly faith. And in James chapter 2, it says that she was justified by her works, by saving the spies and sending them out a different way. This Canaanite woman not only saved the lives of those spies, but she saved her entire family from the wrath of God.
Well, the Bible says that once the children of Israel left Egypt, they ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and then eventually came to encamp near Shittim. Now, that's just east or across from Jericho on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And from there, Joshua 2 tells us that Joshua sent 2 spies over to Jericho to no doubt assess the strength and the resolve of the citizens there. And the Bible then says that they came to lodge at the house of Rahab. And while they're there, somebody found out that these spies are there. They told the king, and then the king sent soldiers to her house to detain those spies.
By God's providence, word somehow gets to Rahab in advance of the king's men coming, and so she hides the spies under the drying flax on her rooftop. There she makes a covenant with them. She would help them to safety if they, in turn, spared her and her family. The spies then negotiated their side of the agreement. She had to keep their location a secret, but furthermore, she would also have to help them escape from the most fortified city in the ancient world. Rahab stated confidently, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed." Then the Bible gives us a fascinating detail that most certainly must have seemed hard to believe. During the ensuing attack, Rahab would have to gather all of her family under her roof and identify her house by hanging a scarlet cord from a window.
Rahab hides the spies and helps them escape in an act of faith. It doesn't seem to be a matter of simple self-preservation. She says that she has heard of everything God had done, and yet she trusts in him. The Bible often praises the faith of women and Gentiles, and we're most familiar with the examples we find in the Gospels. But here is an example in the Hebrew Bible of a Canaanite woman of faith.
Rahab didn't just believe in the existence of God, she literally believed in what he revealed. That is, she believed it was he who was bringing Israel into the Promised Land. Risking her very life, she had no more evidence to go on than the reports that had spread among the people in Jericho. Whatever rumors or stories made their way through the city, they must have been powerful. Out of Rahab's weakness, she was made strong in faith through the power of God. You know, Rahab is one of the most interesting people in all of Scripture. There may be some, disagreement about the Old Testament word, but the book of James uses a word for harlot, for Rahab, that is really unmistakable as to what it means. But she's also a person who sees the mighty works of God and responds to those works. She's a person of great inner strength, apparently, because she's able to reach out to God through His people, to align herself with those people, and to receive the blessings that God has for her. Do you, like Rahab, live your life by faith and not by sight? Rahab's faith and conviction gave her the courage to look death in the face and live. Nothing really has changed for us in this respect. Courage is born from unwavering faith, but more importantly, her example reveals to us a remarkable characteristic of God. He is forgiving and merciful to those who demonstrate faith, courage, and those who humble themselves unto obedience, even when it doesn't make sense, even if it isn't the safe thing to do.
This woman, Rahab, had a saving faith that will be remembered for all of time. Now, God saw so much in this woman that He saw fit to allow this Canaanite woman to become a mother in the line of the Messiah. And even though she was a harlot, God only saw her as a sinner, someone in need of salvation, someone who wanted to be saved, and someone who was willing to step out in faith and do exactly as she was commanded to do.
A transformed life like that experienced by Rahab is possible for us. As she was adopted into God's family after being saved from Jericho, we too will be adopted into God's family with an opportunity to see glory. God asks of us the same as He did Rahab. Have faith in me. Give up everything. Forget your past. Reside under my protection, and I will give you rest unto your soul. Let us never forget the story of Rahab, a common woman that certainly lived a hard life inside these walls. But because of her conviction, because of her courage, she became an uncommon hero of faith. If God can transform her life into what He did, and if He can take down these great walls, think about what He can do in your life. He can transform your life in an amazing way. And He can reduce the walls around your heart to rubble if you let Him.
You are the canyon and I am a crevice. You are the heavens and I am a star. You are the thunder and I am a whisper.
Jericho is one of the oldest cities of the ancient world and the first city to be taken by the Israelites on the west side of the Jordan River. Prized for its natural springs and trade location, Jericho was a highly fortified city that met its demise when the Israelites had entered into the Promised Land. A great battle took place here, with the Bible revealing that the walls fell down flat and the children of Israel marching up into that city and destroying it by fire. However, within the last 100 years or more, another great battle has been going on in Jericho, and it's the battle over whether or not archaeologists have actually discovered the city destroyed by Joshua as revealed in the Bible. While there's still a lot of debate, the evidence, it's compelling and it's fascinating. The archaeology of Jericho, coupled with the biblical account, have captured the imagination of many, but just as compelling is the story of a woman by the name of Rahab, whom God saved from that destruction. She is a prostitute, but as revealed in James 2, becomes an exemplar of faith. Her story is one of the rare jewels to truly be examined in this treasure trove of facts and information.
In the days of the Israelite conquest of Canaan, Jericho was considered an impregnable city, able to resist the best that armies could throw at it. With its thick and high walls, the inhabitants should have felt safe and secure. But they didn't. God's victories over Israelites' enemies had signaled a new day was coming. As Rahab told the Israelite spies, the inhabitants of Jericho were afraid, and they were right to be. For us to stand amidst the remains of this ancient and fortified city impressed upon us all of the power that God brought to bear in destroying these walls and in securing victory for His people.
I'll explain it later. So, I think again and again, it's so amazing to be able to see the sites where these Bible stories are told. You know, most of us from being little bitty listen to all these stories, and now to actually get to see them, and not just see them, but also understand that they're real locations. And that for many years, like Jericho was one of those cities. Now, if you remember, he said something about 4 levels, level 4. What he's talking about is as they excavated and they would dig, they would go down the levels. And just like any place, as decay and rebuilding, you tend to build on top of. And then the next city comes along, something happens, and they just build. So over the thousands of years, the original city that was in the Bible was buried basically by new construction and new buildings, and there were other natural disasters that occur in those areas. So it took them a while to dig down. So what I thought was interesting is that, 75 years ago, 50 years ago, they didn't believe that this story was accurate. There were so many things they said, this is not real. This city did not happen. That Bible story is a myth. And then that one archaeologist found level 4, and they started digging, and they started exposing, and they started finding a wall that had fallen outward. They started to see the evidence of the fire, and the sequence as well. Notice that was something else, that the sequence of the archaeological evidence is a sequence in which the Bible says it occurred. So it matches. So that's something else that I think is very encouraging. But let's talk about the story. Because another aspect to this is, how do you take a city by just walking around it? Like he had pointed out, they did not have siege engines, which, if you think of a siege engine, it's nothing like what we think of. It basically was this monster tower on wheels, and they would roll it up against the wall, and they would start being able to breach over the wall or somehow start, engaging. But it was a device that they could breach over these city walls. You notice that's why they're talking about how difficult it would be to penetrate Jericho, because the way that it was sloped had one wall and this huge slope and then another wall. So anybody who's going to try to attack it has to go over that wall, and they're exposed, and then they got to go uphill, and they got to go over another wall. So it really was a very strong fortification. Now, last week we looked at Masada, remember? And that was a city that the Romans took down, and the Zealot Jews in about 73 AD, and how that they had put their faith on that city being so elevated and so secure that nobody could take them, believing that God would deliver them, and misplaced their faith. And the Romans, what they do? They brought in dirt, and they built this rampart to go up, and they were able to go up, and then when they saw that they'd piled all this wood and organized it, they just set it on fire. And so I thought the lesson about the idea of us placing our faith in technology, things in which we think we're secure, but really we're not. A lot of things in the world we do that. Here we have another one that I thought was interesting, another one. It's kind of another Bible lesson about a fortification. And before we come back over to Jericho, I would like to talk about another one that I forgot last week to talk about. I got a little distracted about Hezekiah and looking at Jerusalem. When the Assyrians had come in and invaded around, I think it was 720 BC, and they had taken off the 10 northern tribes, and they were coming through. Well, they didn't just stop with the 10 northern tribes. They penetrated on in. Sennacherib, the king, or Sargon, penetrate all the way down, come down, and they're ready to come in and to attack Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, as we've already seen in one of these passages, was a really well-fortified city within itself. But they couldn't hold out. They wouldn't be able to hold out because the Assyrians knew how to take out a city with walls. And the arrogance that they displayed before the Hebrews in front of the wall, whenever he sent his messengers ahead of them, was like, you know what, we've killed all the gods of all those nations, and some of those were your gods. And so what makes you think you're going to survive? We're going to destroy you. Now, again, here's a fortification. People that were, a covenant relationship with God. Instead of this arrogance, Hezekiah tears his clothes and he weeps and he petitions the prophet to go speak to God and, what do we do? And the prophet comes back and tells him, you know what? Don't worry about it. God's going to take care of it. And that night, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers died. And the cuneiforms that they found back in Assyria, where Sargon was at, show about this conquest. So it's something that's documented outside of Judea. They found over near Turkey, where that this king had come into the land. He came in, he besieged Jerusalem, and then all of a sudden it just says, and he went home. He's real bold about, now he doesn't say, yeah, we woke up one morning and 185,000 soldiers were dead. No, he's not going to say that. Why would he say that? But it was so devastating, and so shocking historically when you would read that why did you just turn around and go home? You went down there with this arrogance to destroy that city, and you destroyed everything, and then all of a sudden you just go home? So the lesson, one group of people, in Masada, was people who thought they were serving God. They were zealots, and they weren't. They had a hardened heart. They thought God was going to deliver them, but God was carrying out what he had promised. He had already promised that if they didn't obey and follow, that this is a part of the punishment, the judgment, the justice that he would bring. And they fought against that. And they committed suicide. Remember we talked about suicide last week. And then we have, Hezekiah, God's people again, but the leadership turned to God and repented basically and wanted to serve God, and God rescued them. So was it about the wall? No. What's the common thing we have here is faith in God and obedience and following him and supporting what he wants accomplished. So now we come to Jericho, which I don't have these historically in alignment. They're not historically aligned. So now, if you're a citizen of Jericho and you're sitting behind that wall and you know that you have one strong city, it is so fortified, but for 40 years, you've had messages come, and you've heard about these Hebrews who are wandering in the desert over there, and you would hear a lot of information about what's happening to Moab, to all these other nations, and how that these guys came. Where did they come from? Well, they came from Egypt. And then you hear the stories about their God divided the sea, and they went through it. And hear all these stories about it, and how successful, and everybody they go up against, they defeat them. And now guess what? They're across the River Jordan, right there. And they're fixing to move over. So now, if you were in that city, and you know they're posed to come in, because I'm sure as well, they're not ignorant. They don't sit there and go, well, we don't care what's going on across the river. They had information. They probably had their spies, and they were listening to some of the Hebrew. Talk gets around, and they're going to move on us. They're coming in. A part of what their God said was they're going to give this land, their God's going to give this land to them. So they knew they were a target. Did they do anything about it? No, nothing. Again, like Masada, they thought, we're secure. They're not going to be able to take us. So they had an opportunity to repent. And I really do believe, because I know God as what I do know about him in the Bible, is that if they would have opened up the gates and walked out and surrendered, He might have burnt that city down, but it would have been a whole different story, because that's our God. That's what we see. That's what God told Jerusalem whenever Babylon was going to destroy him. And the king asked, what do we do? And God said, open the gates and surrender. Yeah, you're going to go into captivity, but it's going to go a whole lot better for you. So if we look at God's character and how he interacts, I truly believe that the people in Jericho had an opportunity. All that information was coming over. Now you have them posed on the other side of Jordan. And what does it say? One of the things in the first part of Joshua there is they were terrified. They're terrified, but what did they do about it? Nothing. Nothing. So I'm asking, when you're terrified, what do you do? You know, it reminds me of, what is it, that sheep, the fainting sheep? Have you ever seen that? Where you can scare them and they'll faint and fall over? You've seen them on videos probably all over. Is that the way we are spiritually sometimes? We're like that, fainting, something scary in life or something starting to get out of control, and we just lock up and fall over? They did nothing. But one woman had the courage. She had the same information that everyone in that city had. And look at the difference. And look at the outcome as well. And so when we look at her, she in that, and they mention it, so I won't go back and read all that, but about what she said to the spies, about that they were very aware of it. And she says in 11, as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. And there was no spirit left in any man because of them, because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. That's pretty good, isn't it? That's a good description of who he is. So she had the same knowledge, but look at the outcome and the difference it took. Now, if you're Rahab, you know, your culture, your family, everybody, your friends, your neighbors, everything is in that city. To step away and make a decision to go with the Hebrews was very bold. And that's the other thing, peer pressure. There were probably a lot of people that came that close like Rahab, but they didn't. And what was the consequences? They were wiped out. But it took a lot for her to say, you know what? No. And it wasn't just for her, because we know her and her family as well. But she evaluated her life as it was, all the things that she was familiar with, and she said, you know what? I know where the God of the heavens and the God below, I know that he's with you. Now, the other side of that is, do people see that in us as Christians? Can they see us and say, I can see your life and know that you have the God of the heavens above and the God below, just like her? Because that's what people have to see as well, in us. And that's what she was able to see. When people learn of your life, very similar to the way that the children of Israel, all those 40 years that they had journeyed, they could look at their lives as a nation and go, look at what God was working in their lives. That should be us as well. People should be able to look at us and say, look at all the things that happened in that person's life and how well they've been taken care of. Okay, maybe they didn't win the lottery. Maybe they weren't becoming famous. But look, something about their life, you can tell that their faith was placed well in God. And that will help us look at it. And that also, as Christians, there are some Rahabs out there. There are some Rahabs. There are some, and not just female Rahabs in a sense, but there are people out there that know. They have the same information, don't they? That there is one true God. And there's going to be one Rahab that's going to say, I choose him. We need to be that person that can be there for them and ready to receive even a prostitute like this. It also reminds me about the idea of how God shows no partiality when we're looking at Romans chapter 2 on Sunday afternoons. This shows God shows no partiality. We have the Bible and we look at it and we think it's very Hebrew, and somehow God showed favoritism to the Hebrews, and if you weren't a Hebrew before Christ came, well, just tough luck. No. She was a Canaanite. She worshiped all these pagan gods, and yet we see that she had that love for God, and God recognized it. He recognized that faith. Even to the point where she is in the genealogies of the Messiah. Wow. I mean, that to me is pretty amazing to think about. And I think that for you and I as a message is we devaluate ourselves so much at times, and we think we're so unworthy. But now this sounds bad on Rahab, but if the Lord will put a prostitute in the genealogy of our Savior, what about you? So when he says that we're equal inheritors with Christ, when we hear about all these wonderful blessings, they're true, and we can see it with that. So, all right, now that was my little segment. So if you guys want to go ahead and don't see any comments yet online, just make sure you turn on the mic there and talk close so everybody can hear you. I can hear you, but everybody else out there too. So, okay.
I'm a little ashamed. I was today years old, realizing Rahab was part of the genealogy. I didn't know that. I was like, say what? Like, I read it and read it and read it, and I was just like, oh, probably just another Rahab. I don't know. When it came to his genealogy down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's new for me.
I think it's overlooked, and I think that's what's interesting is James chapter 2:25. When first he says Moses, talking about faith without works. I think it's amazing. It's amazing. James goes, look at our father Abraham. That's a good guy, right? Yeah, that's a good moral religious guy you could hold up and say, I'm proud of this guy. Of all the people that James brings up next is a prostitute, and he doesn't cover it up. In 25, he says, and consider the prostitute Rahab. Even she, because she had faith, she acted upon it. That's what she did. And so that to me, is like, so what about me? What am I doing? Why do we feel so insignificant?
Well, the story of Joseph and his brothers is kind of like, reminds me of that whole thing too, because like the worst of the brothers ended up being through Perez, which is like breakthrough. He wasn't the best one at all. Like, if anything, he's the one that rejected Joseph and made this all happen. But then if you follow this story, like he gets down on his knees and says sorry. But it's just crazy how he uses the weakest people. And it's like a slap in the face to the people that are so self-righteous. And it really makes you think, like, the prostitute or the brother that sold the Joseph, and like, you just can't think like that when you think of his bloodline and how it was imperfect to be used for something so great. And that's just crazy to me.
And if you're writing a novel and you're trying to prove this pure, righteous God has done all this, and you need to believe and be baptized and do all this, you'd have thought he would have cleaned the story up a little.
Yeah, it's like super honest.
Let's don't talk about that crazy uncle we got in the family, right?
Yeah.
We don't talk about him, because it's just a little embarrassing to know, we've got those family members where, Suzanne does that to me all the time. Somebody will go, oh, so you're kin to the herring? She goes, no, but my husband is. I'm like, thanks. But I thought of that one time because you look at Ruth. She's a Moabitess. She's in the genealogy. She's David's grandmother. And then you look at, like you said, Judah, the brother Judah. and Tamar and some of the things that go on with those guys. I mean,
Or
that's what I mean about
Jacob
the
himself.
brutal honesty that God
Yeah.
shows.
Yeah, and Jacob himself for screwing over Esau. I can never say that guy's name right. The brother, where he took his inheritance. I mean, he literally kind of like tricked him in
Yeah.
out of it. So it's not like it's pristine or anything. It's like, no, these are humans. They screwed up, but that doesn't matter. Like, God understands. And also, for the Rahabs out there that look at our God because of our example, in Matthew 24, I was flipping back between that and Daniel 11 and 12, but I think it's Daniel 11 verse 35. Basically, how Christians near the tribulations, they intrigue people with their faith. Like, they end up dying for their faith, being martyrs to intrigue people. And that kind of reminded me of that Rahab situation.
Mm-hmm. So it's so hard not to branch off this topic, but so let's come back, kind of look at like Rahab in that city and the whole culture and her lifestyle and everything about it. Now, and I thought about when the battle occurred and she's rescued and she's brought back and brought into wherever they brought her, into the tribes, how well do you think she felt? How comfortable?
Well, they had rules for strangers.
They had them rules, but come on,
Yeah.
we've got rules too. You be nice to each other,
Yeah.
but how, I mean, that's the other thing, that here's these people who have God, but they're just as messed up, aren't they? Why are they out there 40 years? Huh? It wasn't like they were perfect themselves, but yet, so I know that when Rahab showed up, they go, oh, there's that prostitute that, helped us bring the city down. Oh, there's that prostitute Rahab. Oh, there's that, every time what's her genealogy? What tribe is she from? How do you, it must have been really hard for her to feel one or part.
Hopefully it was just for a few seconds and she just was showered with love.
I would think so, but I don't think so.
Yeah,
I
probably.
think it was a typical human reaction that, oh, the joy's there, victory and everything, but I think there was some racism. There was probably some segregation, just a little
yeah.
bit, she, what did she do for a living? Come on, really? That's not going to bother you? She was a prostitute?
Yeah.
She's a Canaanite?
Yeah, they're
and that's
probably
what we're
wearing-
doing now? We're killing Canaanites because they're so ungodly? And we're going to bring her in as an equal?
But that's crazy because it's like, well, it's not the first Gentile if they were always bringing strangers in, but it's just a foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do is bring in those people.
And didn't we see that in the book of Acts when we're studying it? What was one of the problems, the challenges they had? Bringing the Gentiles in.
Yep.
And they were prejudiced. And I'm saying that in the sense that they prejudged everyone who wasn't a Hebrew because they didn't have Mosaic law. And so can we find a lesson today in the church?
Oh, yeah.
So how does that?
It's sad because Gentiles now do it to each other, like the other Gentiles. Like, it's not just Jews going, like, you can't be part of this. It's Gentiles now building a wall around their little churches. So that's kind of mind-blowing to me too. It's like, come on, you're just a Gentile.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not the chosen Jew, or like, you're just a Gentile. So what makes you different from that person?
So when we have new people join the church,
Yeah.
can that not have a little bit of that? Ginny,
Yeah.
we could pick on her and say, well, she was raised in the church. Because I've known her since, I think you were just out of diapers, I think. And now you've got,
Since the belly, Ron.
what's that?
Hold on. Dang, this is loud. That I've been in the church since the belly. So that's why I was like I was telling you before that it was so hard to come back because I knew better, and it's just like all the judgment and like the frown upon, and you just don't do that. So it was like very hard to come back. But I
So
was glad
now-
I came
Yeah,
back.
that's
Go
what
ahead.
Paul's problem.
You got to talk a little loud, Chelsea.
That's what Paul's problem. Well, and mine. And I just got over it first.
Yeah.
I decided to forgive those people because they're human. They're going to do it anyways, and I'm used to it. Like, I get funny looks all the time.
Well, and I know I've had a couple of discussions, and one of them actually was with a good friend that's a preacher that I say he was raised in the church. He's always been faithful, and I was always a little jealous because I wasn't. You know, I wasn't raised in the church, even though everybody knows my grandparents and they were faithful Christians, but I wasn't. And so I wasn't raised in the church from the belly. And so I really don't think I got serious about my spirituality until I was in my 30s. I didn't start preaching until I was 40. And so I look at some of those young men or men who have had those homes and kind of raised in the church with a little bit of envy. But then when we were talking about it, he looked at me and he goes, "No, I'm kind of jealous of you." And I go, "Why? Why? Oh my, why?" I mean, I would never want somebody to have to go through what I did to finally figure out how beautiful God is in my life. And he said, "But what I see with yourself and others is that you tend to really start to love God more than some who have always had him. They've always been with him. They've always been around him." And so there's a lot, and that's what I see with Rahab. That there's a lot of us who come to the Lord later in life or come back, and we bring a little Rahab with us, don't we? And it's hard to reintegrate. And that's why it's so important. And I think that's what Paul was dealing with in Corinth, about when the man who taken his father's wife, and they rebuked him, and he said, "Now love him. Love him. Bring him back. Receive him and restore him back like he was." That is a tall order, isn't it?
I think it's hard for the church to do that.
And that's why this is a great lesson. That's why I try to twist this a little bit and go, think about Rahab now living among the Hebrews as they're marching along in all these battles. We kind of lose her, don't we? We don't hear about her again until she pops up on the other side in the New Testament in Hebrews. She's in the heroes of faith. And then James brings her up. And then if you're reading the genealogies, she'll come up there. But it's like she disappears. But she had a whole lot of life and a lot of interaction in her life. Wasn't necessarily easier. Just like when we become a Christian, and it doesn't mean that our life is going to become easier. She's not going to gain a genealogy or a tribal inheritance because she's a Canaanite. And they become very tribal. That, what tribe are you from? What tribe are you from? Now, she did marry into one, and it was the tribe of Judah. How do we know that? There's a bonus question. How can I confidently say that she's in the tribe of Judah?
David.
Came through, yeah. That was the descendant, the genealogy. And that's about it. But come on, life, real people, real problems. She probably had some challenges. And I think the fact that she continued with, looking at the genealogies and then finding her, God commenting her through the Holy Spirit about her character, shows us a lot about her life after Jericho. This isn't just a comment here in Joshua, in Hebrews, in James, just a little blimp of Jericho and Rahab. This is Rahab, her life.
Her transformation.
What's that?
Her transformation.
Yeah, her transformation, her spiritual life, and that she continued to remain faithful. That's the other, she gained the reward. I mean, how many prostitutes got their name in the Hall of Fame of heroes and in the genealogy? And not only that, but of course the bigger one is, of course, she's right with God. So I in a lot of ways, she's a hero to me because I can see how you're so comfortable in the world and you've got these walls around you and you feel safe. But you look out there and you know there's a God outside those walls and you see all the power and everything he's doing and working around you. And you're sitting inside that wall thinking, well, okay, yeah, he scares me. I'm a little scared because I know there's a judgment coming, but I got these walls and I got a bunch of people here with me. So, but they're coming down. Those walls are coming down, and some point we're going to have to face God. Now, do we wait till the walls come down? That's a little late. Or do we take the courage like Rahab?
She also sounded sick of her situation too, like being a prostitute, like how they said how it might have been like the slums. She was probably looking around her and seeing the falsehood of these towers and was like, I don't want this anymore. And to look out there and see the people, like, she's also the inspiration for the Jews, like the Gentiles are to be to the Jews today, to be like, look, this is your God. Like, we see it. So you definitely should.
Mm-hmm.
But she probably took that as, like, this is my escape. Like, and she wasn't afraid to, like, ask for that salvation, too. Like, she humbled herself, but, like, it's crazy the bravery she had to be like, hey, I know this is your people, and you're God of these people, but can you take me in? It's kind of like, I don't know what the conversation was, but to have even a thought that I want to be a part of this, and like is an opening to, yes, Gentiles. Like, he is the God of all, not just to one.
Well, I think the other aspect is Paul says, not many noble, not many wise come. It's the people who see the volatility of life, the chaos that's created by not having a God, not having your faith, and all the things that are happening, that we are kind of powerless, like Rahab, that those are the ones that came. You saw that with the Messiah when he came. Who were coming to him? Who were attracted to him? It was those who were like the Rahabs, the brokenhearted, those who needed him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was probably living that hard life that brings you to God. Like, the whole reason why he let Judah go is why he's letting the world go right now into the hands of Satan is so we turn to him. We realize, oh, this is life without God. Okay. Yeah, I'll pick God.
Mm-hmm.
like she was at that point, like where we all should turn to, and then point to the Jews. This is your God.
So if you're online, jump in. We're fixing to kind of wrap up. So if you have something, there's kind of a delay, and I tend to always seem to cut the class, and then somebody pops up with a comment, and we're already offline. So please, quickly, kind of jump in because we're getting toward the top of the class. That's why I like these passages. It really stirs a lot of ideas around the spiritual message, the way they format this video. They go out, you look at the geography, the archaeology, things like that. You get to see the real places, and then they bring a lesson. They bring it back to the Bible, and it gives us a great place to have some of these great discussions we've had. So we are bumping up.
Want to give it a minute for them?
What's that?
Want to give it a minute for them?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Because it's like, we still got a few, it's 5. Like I said, it's so awkward because I think it's like 10 seconds almost, like a delay. So in case somebody wants to pop up and ask something.
I still think it's crazy that all of it exists because they try to tell you so much. It's just a fantasy, that Bible. Like, none of it's real. Like, you can literally go to the tombs of some of these ancestors. Like, you can go to the tombs where their skeletons are laying. Like, because I Googled, when I was first reading the Bible, I Googled every location. And it was like, just the fact that they're real, like, makes me like establishes, yes, I'm going to believe. Like I'm going to take a chance.
Well, I think that's why, when we're looking at Romans chapter 1, where he talks about that people are without excuse. Today, people are honestly without excuse because look at all the evidence that we're showing through these passages and the other ones we've done, the apologetic press. People are really, you really have to be suppressing that truth, like what Paul said. And then we know what happens when people suppress the truth like that. God lets them go, and they turn over to their own passions and desires, and they're gone. And that maybe that's the people in Jericho. That's the type of people that were living in Jericho, where they had so much given up on accepting that the real one true God, that God has backed away, because we know that there was a judgment coming on all the people in that land. And it wasn't just because he needed rent. It wasn't an eviction notice because God needed a place to put his people. It was a judgment coming upon them and serve the purpose of bringing in the Hebrews and fulfilling the promise to Abraham. Well, okay, it's get a little more time, just a little bit. But if you have any comments, you'd like to, leave them on the YouTube as well. We can respond to them next week. I will bring them up and read them. And
I know.
all right, well, thank you guys for participating in the class. Those who are here with us, those who are online, I hope that you will join us again Sunday morning at 9:45 for Bible study, 10:45 for worship, and at 4 o'clock that afternoon. We're in Hebrews for the sermon lessons. So just read the first chapters of Hebrews and go over to Romans, same thing. And you'll be able to stay up and learn some on your own. And if not, hopefully, absolutely, we'll see you like next Wednesday. All right, we'll see you.